you so much for having me. I'm very excited to get to talk to you all about. It's been following on from some of the topics already touched on by some other speakers today. So I will just pull up my slideshow and then hopefully we can get going. So I will begin in a somewhat appropriate follow on to one of the last talks. I'm going to begin in fictionalized medieval Scotland with a quote from Macbeth. I just want to double check, is my screen currently sharing?
I can't see it.
Okay. Bear with me for one moment and I'll see if I can't rectify that. Okay, I think we've got it now.
Yes, we have lift on.
Thank you so much, Melody. So with our quote from Macbeth, "Stay, imperfect speakers, and tell me more." So Macbeth implores the Weird Sisters, an exhortation which Amanda Eubanks Winkler has noted is redolent with meaning, evoking associations of gender, disability, power, occult and otherwise, and rusticity. This line encapsulates a complex and historically pervasive phenomenon, the multiplicity of meanings invested in the voices of women. Macbeth's perception of the Weird Sisters as imperfect is nothing new, even for a fictionalized medieval Scotland. Beginning in antiquity, historic records and literary sources alike indicate a marked exclusion of the voices of women from public fora, whether transfigured into mute flora or fauna for mythic misdemeanors, told, like Penelope, to effectively shut up and weave in the Odyssey, or in the rare cases of women speaking publicly and on record, ridiculed as inhuman or unfeminine. The end result is always the same. The voices of women are rarely those telling the story, if they even feature at all. The cause of the Weird Sisters' imperfections have been interpreted in numerous ways. Perhaps it's a difference in language or accent. Perhaps it's the cryptic sentiments that they express. Or perhaps it is simply that they are women, or seem to be, and poor elderly women at that. There is nonetheless a curious contradiction at play in Macbeth's exhortation. While the sisters' speech is imperfect, worthy of reproach, it's definitely still worth listening to. Appearing as they do amid thunder, lightning, and in rain, in the most inhospitable of rural settings, the Weird Sisters serve as arcane mouthpieces for their environment and are, as such, imbued with an elemental power. Within folk horror, the voices of women are, like those of the Weird Sisters, associated time and again with a power emanating from the landscape, utilised to create a liminal sense of time out of time. They are folk horror before folk horror, a prototype for the unsettling rustic types that alienate and unnerve civilized modern visitors to remote settings. It's perhaps little surprise that the echoes of the Weird Sisters' appearance present throughout the folk horror genre in the voices of the landscape, which are almost invariably those voices perceived as women. Let us turn to my first example, which remains in the vicinity of Macbeth, with the opening scenes of Robin Hardy's The Wicker Man. Howie takes off to fly above the remote, unspoiled Scottish landscape, stunningly exemplified in the cliffs of Skye. The noise of his propellers is drowned out by the Highland widow's lament. The picture presented to us is one that is romantic and idyllic. It's with its unpopulated isles and rugged scenery, accompanied by pipe drones and lyrics adapted from the words of Robert Burns, we may as well be watching an alluring promotion for Scottish tourism, but this particular song, as our first sonic experience of the film, fulfills a deeper function. Kevin J. Donnelly and numerous most cinema goers, I think everyone will agree, that there's something deeply unsettling about a disembodied voice, a fact that has been exploited throughout horror cinema's history. From a cappella nursery rhymes echoing through abandoned houses to sourceless screams emanating from graveyards, or, if you're me, the sound of the children upstairs laughing in your apartment, asynchronous vocalizations are not only effective tools for the evocation of fear and suspense, but also standard tools in the folk horror soundscape arsenal. Oh, I am so sorry. A disembodied voice has informed me that my screen is currently not sharing. Allow me to amend that. Thank you, disembodied voice. I appreciate it. Within folk horror, the asynchronous voice takes on an additional, though no less uncanny role to that in other horror cinema, that of the voice of the landscape. As Scoville details in Hours Dreadful and Things Strange, folk horror has its own idiosyncratic relationships with topography and landscape, channeling a sense of the uncanny through subverting our pre-existing relationships with such recognizable types of place. I would argue that part of these subversions rests in the voice that is afforded to the landscape through the application of music. While there are instances, such as Mark Wilkinson's scoring for The Blood on Satan's Claw, in which the diegetic sounds of the landscape in the form of birdsong inform the melodic and rhythmic forms of the musical score, the use of disembodied voices to suggest a supernatural connection and communication between the viewer, listener, and landscape appear to be far more common. To return to the voice that heralds in The Wicker Man, The Highland Widow's Lament was first published in 1796 and regales the listener with the sad state of a woman widowed and impoverished by the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Performed in a traditional style with minimal accompaniment and sparse vocal textures with lots of ornamentation, the song fulfills a transportive function in evoking a sense of tradition and of age. We are drawn into the history of the landscape. Drowning out as it does the sounds of Howie's playing, its diegesis is questionable. It seems both to emanate from the landscape itself or potentially from within Howie's mind and his perception of that landscape. Juxtaposed with shots of the seaplane and Howie in its interior, the combination of the landscape and singing voice create a sense of opposing modernity and the ancient, that is to continue throughout the film, enforcing early on the sense of Howie as an outsider or intruder into said landscape. The lyrics focus on a plentiful past, similarly foreshadows the plight of the Summerisle population, seeing the disembodied voice in this way prophesy what is yet to come, as if the land itself were giving us a weird, sisterly, cryptic warning. In the final scenes of Robert Eggers' The Witch, we experience this phenomenon yet again, as Thomasin, the sole survivor of a Puritan family, having signed her name in the Devil's Book, proceeds into a forest accompanied by Black Philip. We become slowly aware of a disembodied whispering from within the trees. As she proceeds deeper and deeper into the forest, the density and texture of these voices deepens until we become aware of the seeming source of their sounds, a coven of witches in ecstasis. I think that's enough to give the gist of it. While the diegetic source for the sound here is presented in the form of the coven, the manner in which sound is introduced to us does not quite match what we see. While it's not entirely asynchronous, the volume at which the coven's voices are heard is such to generate discomfort in the viewer-listener, and certain sounds remain unaccounted for. As in earlier scenes wherein the titular witch prepares a flying ointment from the body of Thomason's infant brother, irregular percussive sounds punctuate the chant without any visible source. The uncertainty of origins for these noises creates a sense of porousness between the human and the natural world. Are the voices and noises that we hear those of the witches? Are they the voices of the forest, or are they some semblance of the two in sympathy? Similarly to the Highland Widow's Lament, the chant drowns out all other sound to the point of obscuring Thomason's laughter or cries as she attempts to join the coven. As in the previous case, the soundscape is a liminal one, straddling the lines between the diegetic and the imagined, whilst retaining its ties to the environment. As in the case of the Weird Sisters, the presentation of women's voices as those of the landscape is rife with contradictions. On one hand, the attribution of women's voices to a natural/supernatural world in a mode preoccupied with the landscape can be interpreted as empowering, affording a subjugated social group an agency otherwise unattainable, and echoing the tradition of the feminization of earthly forces throughout global mythology, or even the tradition of earth goddesses. However, when examined within the context of their narratives, all is not necessarily as it seems. The construction of gender, and as an extension, gendered power within folk horror narratives, is often biologically essentialist, attributing occult power solely on the basis of reproductive capability. In the case of the Wicker Man, Willow, Summerisle's Venus, is praised only in relation to her sex, her capability for enchantment seemingly reliant on her sexual urges and organs. On Summerisle, even the most enchanting of women are so because they serve as a means of production or reproduction for a capitalist patriarchal autocrat, admittedly one in Converse and tweed. The disembodiment of the female voice within folk horror is in itself dehumanizing and speaks to its transactional nature of power within folk horror narratives. For women to access supernatural power, some aspect of their humanity must be sacrificed, just as Thomasin must sign away her name and possibly her soul to the devil in the form of Black Phillip, yet again reinforcing that her agency comes at the whim of a patriarchal figure, at least as far as Christian mythology is confirmed. Like the imperfect voices of Shakespeare's witches, the voices of women and the land in folk horror rarely reveal what we expect them to. They as much subvert our expectations, they may also indeed reinforce hierarchies at play, arcane and otherwise. So I will leave it there. Apologies for the technical issues and the disappearance of the slideshow.